Hi, it's Mike Stevenson. Today's video we're going to talk about API Management and Document 360. And this use case is from my talk at the Integrate Summit where we'll use Document 360 to produce API documentation to help users who want to consume our APIs. Now, these APIs, they may be externally exposed to application developers and other organizations. They could be APIs that you're going to expose to let your team talk to a third-party system, and there might be internal APIs just for your apps. There's a number of different use cases, and you tend to want different users to have access to different documentation. So over here in API Management, I've built an API for my booking API that I'm going to expose to external developers. When I build my API, you can see I've done some of the common things people would do about creating examples. You can see I've got an example message down here. And what we remember is that with API management, the more you document your API when you build it, the more it becomes usable when you want to sort of let people use that API. So one of the things you can do is you can export your API definition in a number of different formats here. And what we're going to do is in Document 360, which we'll jump to in a second, you can actually take this API definition and build an API. So over here, I'm in Document 360. I've got a project to manage my documentation. Now, there's two areas that I can use in Document 360 if you're not already familiar with it. So up here, we've got an area where you would probably build internal documentation about your support processes and your standard operating procedures. And this feature here is the API documentation feature. Now, what I can do in Document 360 is if I want to create a new API, I can go up here, I can create API, I can then choose a definition. So I'll go and see if we can get an example definition here. So I've got a couple of different APIs I've built before. Let's take that one. And then that's going to import my API spec. And this one's quite a simple API, but you can see I've got my different operations have been documented here. And one of the good things in Document 360 is I'm now looking at my external booking API, and you can see I've got an operation for my save booking and my get booking. Now, what you might want to do, this is obviously generated from API management, but sometimes you need to add additional context to explain to the user what is your API about, why do you need to use this API. So I can add a custom page in here, just basically go and add a section, give it a name, there's a new page, a bit like the one we're seeing here. I can also do things like add categories, so I can build a folder structure to put different information in. And what I want to do here is I want to explain the context of what this API is about. And then I've got another page with the security here. And really what I'm doing is I'm combining pages that come from the generated code from API management via that API spec, combined with custom documentation that I can write myself to support my users. Now, with Document 360, you get a lot of features like document publishing and all of those kind of typical technical content writer features that you would want for building good documentation. Now, while we have our API up and running here, I have this already published, so I can go into my Document 360 instance, and if we go to our homepage, this is my demo project that everyone has access to. I can click on my API documentation, and you can see I've got a sort of structured help file format here. There's the home page that's published. Now, this one's publicly accessible, so it will be available to people that I've allowed, people that know the URL to come and use my API. Now, this is the custom page. I also have the pages that are generated from my API specs. So you can see here, it's got a little bit of metadata about what to use. I've got the query parameter. I've even got the examples that have been imported here. And then what I can do is I've got an API token that's already saved up at the top up here from the last time I used it, but I can put a booking API, a booking ID in here, I can go and execute my API direct from the documentation. You can see we've got an example response that came back here. This actually comes from the Cosmos DB behind the API. And then I can generate code samples down at the bottom here. So if I want to have, say, a C# code sample here, that would work. So that makes my API documentation really easy to use. Now, the next question for me is, well, as I build my API, this is going to be changing quite regularly. So what I want to be able to do is add a DevOps pipeline to be able to update my API. So over in Azure DevOps here, what I've done is I've run an npm command to install the Document360 widget that you can get from npm. And then what I can do is I can run 2 PowerShell scripts. The first PowerShell script here is connecting to my Azure environment. And what I'm going to do, I've got a resource group, an APIM name, and I'm going to export a bunch of APIs. So that's going to go through this list of APIs here, and it's going to download the definitions of those APIs onto the build agent. And then the next PowerShell script, I'm going to go through and I'm going to execute. So in the Doc360 command sort of program, there's a document resync here. So I can specify the ID for my API, which I can just get from Document360. I have a document, an API key, and I can basically publish that that API specification, so it'll automatically update my API. So that's a really easy way of just having this as part of your pipeline. Every time you deploy a new version, it'll automatically sync the latest update to your documentation. That then straight out to your users, and you're in a really good place there. So hopefully that gives you a little overview of how easy it is to build user-friendly, effective documentation, mixing a combination of generated documentation plus handwritten documentation to add the things that you can't easily generate and give your users a great experience. Thank you for listening to today's video. We hope you enjoyed the Integrate Summit.